A volunteer band lifts its horns, and by reflex, blurts bars of God Save the King. Then the mistake dies in brassy confusion. Dawn is breaking over Sabarmati, coconuts crack for luck, rupees flash in the air, and an empire still believes it owns even the taste of the sea. For generations, the Raj had trained India to live inside that kind of absurdity. Salt was not a luxury, not a symbol yet, just a fact of the body. You needed it in the heat, in the kitchen, in the fields, for the poor man's meal and the laborer's sweat. And yet on a subcontinent with long coasts and rich salt deposits, ordinary people could be punished for making their own. Even carrying seawater home could make you a criminal. The law reached that deep, into the most ordinary gesture imaginable. This was how empire worked at its strongest, not only through soldiers and prisons, but through habits, ledgers, stamps, and monopolies so old they began to feel like weather. British salt entered Indian markets by the hundreds of thousands of tons. The tax helped fund a state that asked the colonized to pay for their own administration, their own policing, their own obedience. Extraction was so routine it could hide inside a kitchen jar. By 1930, anger in India was no longer only the anger of lawyers and assemblies. It had moved outward, into villages, mills, farms, and homespun cloth, into the insult of paying too much for something as basic as survival, into the knowledge that even necessity had been licensed from above. The old order still looked enormous, rational, permanent. But permanence is a fragile thing when a government starts forbidding the poor to touch what dries at the edge of the tide. What if a single foggy night saved a revolution? What if one telegram pulled a nation into war? Yesterday's craziness presents Turning Points, uncovering the tiny forgotten moments that changed everything, and the butterfly effects that shaped our world. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge the very fabric of colonial rule. On March 2, 1930, Mohandas Gandhi put the viceroy on notice. Lord Irwin was told that if the appeal failed, the salt law would be broken. The reply was refusal. Gandhi's answer was sharp. He had asked for bread and received stone. 10 days later, at 6:30 on March 12th, he stepped out of Sabarmati ashram with 78 volunteers and began walking to Dandi, not charging a gate, not storming a barracks, walking. That was the provocation. An empire built on codes, tariffs, police files, and distance now had to decide what to do with an old man in homespun cloth, announcing his intentions in advance and daring the state to stop him before he touched the sea. The march did not feel like a riot. It felt like pressure building in public. Gandhi moved through Gujarat in a long white column, stopping at village after village as dust rose around the volunteers' feet. Crowds thickened at every halt. Reporters followed. Congress organizers treated the road like a fuse already lit. Jawaharlal Nehru wrote on March 22 that this was not to be satyagraha as a gesture. Provincial committees were to begin with the Salt Act first and be ready if Gandhi was arrested before he reached the coast. So while the walkers kept their rhythm, the movement around them was being synchronized. Gandhi understood the power of repetition. On the road, he was not only marching, he was recruiting, disciplining, provoking resignations, and turning grievance into a script anyone could perform. A contemporary report noticed something the British could not hide. Before he had even touched seawater, he had already broken the law against seditious speech in village after village. Dozens of village officials resigned. Hundreds pledged themselves. At Nadiad, he urged government servants to leave their posts. In villages still clinging to caste barriers, he pressed there too. The state was being challenged in its tax laws, its authority, and the social habits that helped hold India in place. By the time Gandhi reached Dandi on April 5th, suspense had become part of the crisis. He gave his statement to the Associated Press. The next dawn, April 6th, he walked to the shore, waded into the Arabian Sea with his followers, lifted brine, and set it out for the sun. When the crust formed, he picked up illegal salt. That was all. No explosion. No barricade. Just a pinch of white crystals in the hand of a man the Raj had spent years trying to contain. And because the act was so small, it multiplied instantly. The law was broken the same day in Ahmedabad, Surat, Broach, Kedah, Bombay, and Delhi. Nehru said it outright on April 8th. Contraband salt had become the symbol of the fight. Then the copycat crime spread into daily life. Salt was boiled in clay pots. Seawater was lifted in pans. Batches were hidden, traded, blessed, seized. The first grains gathered at Dandi were bought by eager bidders for $160, a tiny auction that made the monopoly look ridiculous. A government can arrest smugglers and raid depots. It has far more trouble criminalizing breakfast, kitchens, shorelines, and hands. Gandhi moved from Dandi to Karadi, and, as the agitation outran the original pilgrimage, began touring villages by car, speaking more often, widening the front. On April 13th, at a women's conference in Dandi, he said women's time had come to take a full share in the struggle. The march was no longer a line on a road. It was a pattern reproducing itself. The government answered in the language it knew best: arrests, revived press controls, bullets, prison. Jawaharlal Nehru was arrested on April 14th. Mahadev Desai followed. In Peshawar, mass demonstrations erupted on April 23rd. Then came a moment empires dread even more than protest. On April 24th, soldiers of the Royal Garhwali Rifles refused to fire on demonstrators. The next day, police and military withdrew, and for several days the town was in citizens' hands. Now the fiction that this was a manageable disturbance was gone. The machinery was still there. The orders were still issued. But obedience, the invisible substance of rule, had begun to slip. Gandhi pushed toward the next target, the salt works at Dharasana. On May 4th, he drafted another letter to Irwin, informing him of the intended raid. Hours later, at 12:45 in the morning on May 5th, police came to Karadi, took Gandhi into custody, and put him on a bus bound for Yaravda prison. That should have been the clean ending. Remove the man, break the movement, restore the law. Instead, it exposed the opposite truth. By the time they seized Gandhi, the march had already escaped him. Salt was being made, carried, sold, and defended far beyond Dandi. The empire had not stopped the hand at the shore. It was now trying to close millions of fingers after they had opened. In the aftermath of Dandi, the British Raj discovered that the real danger was not salt. It was imitation. What had been a government monopoly became a public habit of defiance. The Raj answered with ordinances, censorship, prison buses, and rifle butts. It revived the Indian Press Act on April 27th. It promulgated the Prevention of Intimidation Ordinance on May 30th. Tens of thousands were arrested. But repression exposed a new weakness. Even Time was reporting that Bombay seemed to obey two governments, and one small detail matters. Shopkeepers signed statements saying they had no complaint against peaceful picketing. Empire still had the jails, the files, the uniforms. Congress was building something more dangerous, parallel legitimacy. That is the deeper aftermath. The march did not end British rule in 1930. It made British rule look temporary. It taught millions that power could be isolated, staged, embarrassed, and forced into overreaction. It also changed who belonged inside Indian politics. Women entered the struggle in larger numbers. Untouchability could no longer be quarantined as a separate social question. Leadership itself became harder to decapitate, because each arrest had a successor waiting behind it. And the pattern did not stay in India. The template survived empire. Find a rule that is ordinary enough to touch daily life, unjust enough to be felt by everyone, and simple enough that thousands can violate it in public. That logic runs forward into anti-colonial movements across the 20th century, into American civil rights campaigns, into boycotts, marches, sit-ins, and the modern idea that legitimacy can collapse before a regime does. Many states still imagine power as a matter of weapons and decrees. The world after 1930 knows better. Power also depends on whether clerks cooperate, whether shoppers comply, whether soldiers fire. Whether crowds keep coming back, that may be the lasting irony. Empires like to think they fall when they are defeated by stronger force, but some of them begin to die when ordinary people discover that rule is a performance, and that even an empire can be made to look ridiculous. Not weak, ridiculous. And once power looks ridiculous, history usually does the rest. If you liked what you watched, please like and subscribe. We post interesting and crazy stories from throughout history every Wednesday and Saturday. Yesterday's craziness, because yesterday was crazy too.